It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10, live from Buckingham Palace. King Charles is joined by his brothers and sister in Westminster Hall with a special vigil for the Queen. A warning of a wait that could last up to 20 hours as people continue to join the queue into the night for a chance to pay their respects to the Queen. David Beckham joined the queue for 12 hours with the crowd before paying his respects to Her Majesty. King Charles visits Wales before holding a reception here at Buckingham Palace with faith leaders.
It is the duty to protect the diversity of our country, including by protecting the space for faith itself.
I'm live in Kyiv, where there are claims that one Ukrainian body recovered from a mass burial site showed signs of a violent death. Police investigators and forensic experts work to retrieve hundreds of bodies from graves dug during Russian occupation. As President Putin says he wants the war to end, but claims that Ukraine is refusing to negotiate.
Also tonight, the community fighting the government's plan to lift a fracking ban, as a report suggests that the science has not changed. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages in our press preview from 10:30. Good evening. There was another moment of reflection for the royal family tonight. The late Queen's children once again stood guard around her body at Westminster Hall as hundreds of people continued to stream through. Outside, the queue is growing, with a warning it could now take nearly 24 hours to reach the end. One of the more famous mourners was a star of the People's Game, David Beckham, queuing for 14 hours from 2 a.m. this morning. Meanwhile, the duties continue. King Charles visited Wales today and held a reception for faith leaders at his new home at Buckingham Palace. Our first report tonight is from Ashish Joshi from the family Vigil.
A family united in grief and in duty. King Charles with his sister Princess Anne and brothers Prince Andrew and Prince Edward joined once more to stand vigil over their mother's coffin. And here to lend support, Camilla, Queen Consort, and other members of the extended royal family. This has been the most demanding of weeks, a relentless royal schedule, allowing little time for reflection. Their loss is deeply personal, but here, for a few minutes at least, it was shared by a mourning public who came to pay their respects to a queen, but also found the king.
We set off from Huddersfield at 2 this morning, so it has been a long day. But just for those 3 minutes there, so special. It's just, they just hold themselves with such dignity.
More than what I expected, so emotional and so special. It's a kind of momentous moment in British history.
It's hard enough for everybody to grieve privately when they have that kind of loss, but for them to grieve so publicly just puts so much extra pressure on them. So I think they handle it amazingly well.
This tradition is known as the Vigil of the Princes. Princess Anne is the first woman to stand guard. Tonight, Prince Andrew has been allowed to wear his Royal Navy uniform, a privilege removed after the scandal of his association with disgraced financier Jeffrey Epstein. The King has been widely praised for his messages of unity. And ahead of tonight's vigil, he reaffirmed his belief in a united, multi-faith kingdom.
I've always thought of Britain as a community of communities. That has led me to understand that the sovereign has an additional duty, less formally recognised, but to be no less diligently discharged. It is the duty to protect the diversity of our country, including by protecting the space for faith itself.
On Saturday, there will be another vigil for another generation of mourners, all 8 of the Queen's grandchildren. A fitting tribute to a Queen whose love of country was matched only by her love of family. Ashish Joshi, Sky News in Westminster.
Meanwhile, tens of thousands of mourners continue to visit the Queen lying in state. Earlier, the queue was so long, entry was paused and a queue to the queue formed. People are now being warned it could take as long as 20 hours to get to the front. The queue begins at Westminster Hall and winds its way back through Victoria Tower Gardens, on the embankment and across Lambeth Bridge. For those who require it, an accessible route is available starting at Tate Britain. On the opposite side of the River Thames, the main queue stretches South Bank, past the London Eye and back to London Bridge. The maximum permitted length is at Southwark Park in Bermondsey, where entry was paused earlier today. Sky's Ashna Huranag reports on the Westminster Queue.
There was the queue, and now there's the queue before the queue. And not the warmest of welcomes for those joining it. But thousands like Alistair are undeterred by the wait or the walk.
Her Majesty gave us 70 years. What's giving her 9 hours? That's nothing.
Despite being 5 miles from Westminster, turning back was never an option for Alison from Richmond in Yorkshire, who's honouring a promise to her late mum.
I'd worked 21 hours for her. When I was very little, me and my mum said we would come to this. My mum's passed away, so I'm here for her and Nanny, aren't we?
Yeah.
Many are making this pilgrimage for their loved ones. And when that opportunity looks like it's slipping away, frustration comes to the fore.
Sit on the line. That's so poorly organised. They should have known.
Crowds were temporarily halted for safety.
This will be open. I'm not sure about that. Open it!
It came after 20 minutes, much to their relief.
Thank you for your patience.
Snaking through Southwark Park is taking on average 3 hours. Every so often, pressure is relieved on the pens and the queue surges forward by another 100 metres. It is overwhelming when you first enter, but morale is high. People expected it. And so they marched on. Among them, football legend David Beckham.
Have you been waiting long, David?
Folks, a little while.
What time did you join the queue?
2:15.
Who, like so many in those precious seconds, was overcome.
I think it's emotional for everybody involved. You know, to obviously, I think to be here, to celebrate the way we have done with everybody today. I think it's been a special day.
But it's not without its challenges. By night, safety in the queue becomes more demanding. Dozens have been taken to hospital after fainting, and there's been a sexual assault charge for someone waiting in line. With the end of the working week, a new crowd joins the back of the queue. They'd been waiting for their opportunity.
I work 6 to 4. It's important to come here and pay our respects to the Queen.
We'll be here. She says with a 10 o'clock train and bus the next morning already booked.
As temperatures dip, the resilience of the thousands is tested as they now face a wait of up to 24 hours. Ashna Huranag, Sky News in South East London.
Well, Sky's Matthew Thompson joins us now from the start of the queue in South East London. Matthew, where exactly are you and what's the situation like at the moment?
Well, welcome to the back of the queue in Southwark Park. This is where it all begins. Where spirits are remarkably high. It's a sort of Friday night feeling in spite of the solemnity of the occasion and what awaits them at the other end in Westminster. And many of these people bracing themselves, potentially, if government estimates are to be believed, for a wait of 24 hours or more. Although the signs here in the park actually say 14 hours rather than 24. So many people we've spoken to are hoping that that is the more accurate estimate. But still, as you can see, people are arriving in their droves. You're live on Sky News.
Hello. Hello, Sky News.
There you go. See, I told you. So, as I say, a festive Friday night atmosphere, people in very good spirits. Whether they still will be in 24 hours' time, if they still haven't reached the other edge, the other end of the queue, is another matter. But government advice is pack warm clothes. It's going to get down to about 8 degrees tonight. Pack snacks, pack water, and do prepare yourself if you are still intending to arrive, as many people are, as you can see, that you may be in this one for the long haul.
Yes, heed the advice. Matthew, thank you for the moment. Earlier, King Charles, who was Prince of Wales for 64 years, made a trip to Cardiff and addressed members of the Senedd in Welsh. He spoke to those who'd gathered to see him, with some singing God Save the King. But not everybody in the crowd was happy with the visit from the new monarch. Dan Whitehead reports now on the King in Wales.
They snaked around the castle walls from the early hours. Thousands waited to see their prince, now king, on his first visit to Wales.
We got up very early this morning, but Jaden obviously didn't sleep all night because he was so excited to see the king. So we've been up quite early and we travelled down by train.
Jaden, what is it that you're so excited about?
I'm really excited to shake the king's hand. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and long live the Queen and King.
While the queue grew longer, 2 miles away, the King and Queen consort began their day at Llandaff Cathedral for a service of remembrance. The King signed the visitor book, this time bringing his own pen after leaky ink issues earlier in the week. Condolences from the Welsh Parliament before addressing it in their own language.
It must surely be counted the greatest privilege to belong to a land that could inspire such devotion. I am resolved to honour that selfless example in the spirit of the words by which I have always tried to live my own life. Ich dien, I serve. Gwasanaethaf.
From politics to the people, the royals made their way to the waiting crowds inside Cardiff Castle. Meetings with dignitaries and the First Minister, even time for a much-needed pick-me-up. But it wasn't long before the wait was over for those outside, many finally getting to shake the new king's hand.
It was amazing, my 3 grandchildren and my 2 daughters, and yeah, it was really special.
Did you get to shake the king's hand?
Yes, and the Queen Camilla as well.
It's important. It was nice for him to have a memory of it, because I remember the Queen when I was little, meeting the Queen, and so for him to meet the King, and it's history, isn't it?
But not all were happy.
Charles, while we struggle to heat our homes, we have to pay for your parade.
Thank you for coming.
The taxpayer pays 100 million for you. What for? Need from Brennan, not one king.
While not all support the monarchy here in Wales, thousands have turned out to greet the new King and the Queen consort in what's being described as a day of transition for this country. The next generation will grow up with King Charles, the former prince of this nation, now starting a new journey in his relationship with Wales. Dan Whitehead, Sky News in Cardiff.
Well, as the events continue, the questions remain about how the royal family is funded. King Charles and Prince William have inherited hundreds of millions of pounds. However, they'll only pay tax on a voluntary basis. Our business correspondent, Paul Kelso, analyses the royal finances.
With the Queen's death, fortunes as well as titles passed down the line of succession, so it's worth reminding ourselves where the money comes from. The royal family is funded by 3 main revenue streams. The sovereign grant, the largest, which was worth £86 million last year, and the Duchy of Lancaster, worth £22 million, both of which will fund the King. and the Duchy of Cornwall, worth £24 million, which will now fund William as heir and Prince of Wales. Now, the sovereign grant is drawn from revenue generated by the Crown Estate, a £15 billion portfolio of property and land, three-quarters of which goes to the Exchequer and the rest to pay for the Crown. And while it was worth £86 million last year, the Queen spent £102 million. Let's have a look at how that breaks down. £64 million was spent on maintaining the royal palaces. Almost £50 million of that went on the refurbishment of Buckingham Palace. £27.5 million went on paying almost 500 members of staff, £4.5 million on travel, and more than £3 million on gas and electricity. The King also gets revenue from the £600 million Duchy of Lancaster estate. That was worth £22 million last year, which the Queen used to fund core members of the family, including Princess Anne, Prince Andrew and Prince Edward. Now, the King will only pay income tax on this if, like his mother, he volunteers to. As Prince of Wales, William will enjoy the surplus from the £1 billion Duchy of Cornwall estate that includes the Oval Cricket Ground and was worth £24 million last year. It is exempt from corporation tax and capital gains tax, and income tax will again be voluntary. Now, as the presumed main beneficiary of his mother's will, the King will also inherit immense private wealth, including Sandringham and Balmoral, the Queen owned privately as part of an estate worth an estimated £350 million. But the detail will remain private, as uniquely, royal wills do not have to go to probate. It's the process by which they become public. And the King will not pay inheritance tax. Gifts from monarch to monarch are exempt. And there's a small matter of more than a dozen palaces and residences around the country. 6 of them in London, plus Windsor Castle, are publicly maintained. But he also has homes in Gloucestershire, Wales and Birkhall up in Scotland, plus the inherited Balmoral and Sandringham in Norfolk. Royal funding is a deal between the palace and Parliament, and by association, the public. But King Charles, ascending in a cost of living crisis, may face greater scrutiny than his mother of what is appropriate for a modern monarch and what counts as excess.
Well, back to events of today, and our royal correspondent Laura Bundock joins me now. And Laura, a very significant speech from the King today.
Yeah, he was speaking to faith leaders at Buckingham Palace, and for the first time we heard him talking about the oaths and the oaths he'll make during his coronation. He spoke about how he was a committed Anglican Christian and talked of this community of communities within a community of communities within the United Kingdom, not in the sense of it being fractured, but in a sense of unity. And speaking of his duty, as he put it, to protect the diversity of our country. It's a really big moment, I think, to hear him speaking like this, particularly about faith and his role within faith. Meanwhile, I think we can see this as this huge week, a week, I think, which has seen the launch of King Charles as he completes this speed date, whistle-stop tour of the nations, if you like. And meanwhile, all the preparations are still gathering pace for the funeral. We now know this route that will take place after the Westminster Abbey service, before the coffin makes its way to Windsor, and details of that route have now been published. And I think to allow members of the public who perhaps can't or unable to queue up to watch the lying in state to perhaps catch a glimpse of the coffin as it makes its way from London to Windsor. And also we've seen today the Prince and Princess of Wales at an army training centre as they met members of the armies in Commonwealth countries, in Australia, New Zealand and Canada as well, who've all been flown in to take part in the state funeral as rehearsals really are starting to get well underway this weekend. And of course, they've been flown in for the state funeral, as have all the state leaders, the likes of which I don't think we'll ever have seen gathering in one place ever before ahead of Monday's funeral.
Laura, thank you. And here's how tomorrow's Daily Telegraph is covering the story. Their headline, Devotion to Duty. You can scroll through the front pages while watching our special press preview by scanning the QR code on your screen now. Joining us here at 10:30 this evening will be the Senior Associate Editor at The New Statesman, Rachel Cunliffe, and Chief Executive of Conservative Home, Mark Wallace.
Good evening from Kyiv. The President of Russia, Vladimir Putin, has made claims today that he wants to end this war, but he says that Ukrainian forces will not end the fighting. Speaking at a summit in Uzbekistan with the leaders of India, Pakistan and China, President Putin confirmed he would continue his mission to take control of the eastern Donbass. Meanwhile, here in Ukraine, towns and cities are now dealing with the aftermath of the fighting. A mass burial site has been found in Izium, in the newly liberated Kharkiv region. The chief prosecutor there has told Sky News the first body to be recovered showed signs of a violent death. This week, the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said his troops had retaken thousands of square kilometres from Russian control in the east and the south of the country. The key city of Izium, in the country's northeast region of Kharkiv, had been under Russian occupation for nearly 6 months. Now, a mass burial site containing around 440 graves has been discovered there after Ukraine retook the area from Russian control. Our security and defence editor Deborah Haynes and her team visited the site today and sent this report.
There is no protection from this horror. It's a scene that's become hauntingly familiar in Ukraine. The retrieval of bodies from makeshift graves. Relentless work, and this is only the start. Officials say the mass burial site holds the remains of hundreds of civilians. How are you feeling?
Very good.
Not very good. This woodland on the edge of the city of Izium, a testament to the reality of Russia's war. You told us about this mass burial site yesterday, and we're here today. Looking around, how do you feel?
Це жах, і нормальний чоловік, нормальна людина не може на це спокійно реагувати. Для нас це великий біль для кожного українця, тому що це все українці, і вони це місце завдяки тому, що є агресор.
The site is next to an actual cemetery, but there's no such dignity here. There's the unmistakable smell of death in the air as the police and the other forensic experts begin the process of digging up the bodies, trying to identify them and trying to work out how they were killed. You'll see on these makeshift markers, some of them have names, have the dates of when they were killed over there, or they have numbers, the numbers meaning that the identity is not definitely known. And in that case, DNA samples will be taken as the police try to work out who has been buried here. Some of the victims are thought to have died in Russian artillery and missile strikes. But one official says there's also evidence of torture, claiming a rope was found around the neck of the first body to be exhumed and injuries to the limbs.
Такі жахливі речі ми бачимо вперше. Всі ці факти ми, скажімо так, через себе проводимо. Тому що ми теж, хоч і прокурори, але ми живі люди.
It's not just civilians buried here. There was also a mass grave holding at least 17 Ukrainian soldiers. Their bodies now being recovered. A local man was damning of a group of Ukrainians whose job it was to bury the dead.
Они их даже не накрыли ни мешками, ни лапотником, ничем. Просто вот так, как собак скинули в этот самый, даже не могила, а вот был этот самый капонир автомобильный, где машину ставили. И вот они с граненой стороны вот, тупой заехали, тупо их скинули все и прикидали.
Russian troops used the woodland as a base as well as for burials. Izium had been a key prize in their invasion until Ukraine snatched it back. Now the focus here is on finding justice for the victims. Like this family, all killed on the same day. Or this woman, who lived through World War II, only to die in war in 2022. Deborah Haynes, Sky News, Izium.
Meanwhile, President Putin has told the Indian Prime Minister he wants an end to the war as soon as possible. The pair was speaking at a summit in Uzbekistan, at which Narendra Modi insisted that now was not an era for war. Sky's Moscow correspondent Diana Magnay has more.
Day 2 in Samarkand, and more admissions from Vladimir Putin as he met with leaders from the Shanghai Cooperation Organization that powerful counterparts aren't too happy with the situation in Ukraine. This exchange with India's Prime Minister, who told Mr. Putin this was not an era of war.
I know about your position on the conflict in Ukraine, and I know about your concerns. I know that you share these concerns. And we want all of this to end as soon as possible. But the other party, the leadership of Ukraine, has claimed that they refuse to engage in negotiating process. They said that they want to achieve their objectives, as they say, on the battlefield militarily.
And then finally, more than a week after Ukraine recaptured swathes of territory in the northeast of the country, the Russian president's response to the recent setbacks.
Основной целью является освобождение всей территории Донбасса. Эта работа продолжается, несмотря на вот эти попытки контрнаступления украинской армии. У нас наступательные операции на самом Донбассе не прекращаются. Они идут. Идут небольшим темпом, но последовательно, постепенно российская армия занимает новые и новые территории.
Only Russian journalists invited to ask questions, though they didn't shy away from asking what everyone wants to know. This was a way for Vladimir Putin to signal to his people, first and foremost, that they have nothing to worry about, that all is going to plan. But what was striking was to hear how his answers were riddled with this anti-Western paranoia, almost a persecution complex, this deeply held conviction that the West is out to destroy the Russian state via Ukraine, and that's what compelled him to act. And though he got no outright expressions of support for his operation in Ukraine from his greatest pal at the summit, Xi Jinping, the Chinese premier expressed similar fears about murky foreign forces.
我们要支持彼此为维护安全和发展利益所做努力，防范外部势力策动颜色革命，共同反对以任何借口干涉别国内政。
Characterizing his operation in Ukraine as an act of self-defense does not wash with the West, and it does not seem to resonate with the rest either. What's clear from 2 days of summitry, though, is that Vladimir Putin is not changing course. Diana Magnay, Sky News, Moscow.
Events have moved rapidly here in the last 2 weeks. Ukraine says it's taken back control of an area around 9,000 square kilometres. That's equivalent to an area the size of the island of Cyprus. But with that has come grim revelations of what civilians have endured in those areas under 5 to 6 months of Russian control. And now the grim discovery of a mass burial site reminiscent of what was found not far from here in Bucha in April. We're staying across events for you here in Ukraine on Sky News. But for now, back to Gillian at Buckingham Palace.
Sally, thank you. A leaked report has suggested that little progress has been made in reducing and predicting the risk of earthquakes caused by fracking, despite the government's plans to lift the ban on the practice. The study by the British Geological Survey also says that there should be more consistent standards when identifying the risks. It's something that one community in Lancashire is fighting against, as our climate change and energy correspondent Hannah Thomas-Peter reports.
A former shale gas fracking site in Little Plumpton in Lancashire. The community here dismayed that the government is due to lift a ban on drilling. Chris and Susan Holliday live close by and have fought fracking every step of the way.
Well, it does feel like they've done this on a whim. We were that close to the site being closed down and restored, and now it seems to everything is up for grabs again.
I'm astounded because the moratorium was put in place in 2019 because of the earthquakes. The government have always said that it'll stay in place unless the science changes. As far as I'm aware, there's nothing been published to say that the science has changed.
Sections of a leaked government-commissioned report from the British Geological Survey appear to say just that. But the same report also points out that other industries are allowed to cause more seismic activity than fracking ever was, and suggests more consistent standards. It's what fracking companies have been lobbying for.
If you applied the regulations that you applied to shale gas to the construction, geothermal, quarrying or coal mining industry, none of them would be able to operate in the UK.
Looser regulations are what activists like Nick Danby fear.
We're in the grip of a climate crisis, and to even be considering launching a brand new fossil fuel industry is just absolutely absurd. It makes no sense whatsoever, given that this government is committed to net zero by 2050.
The new Prime Minister disagrees.
This is about much more than just fracking for gas here in Lancashire. Liz Truss has said her government is preparing to grant around 100 new licences for oil and gas drilling in the North Sea. In essence, she is ushering in a new era of fossil fuel exploration and extraction here in the UK.
It's good news for an industry already enjoying record profits. Although the government says cheap renewables are also part of the answer, critics say the UK is going backwards, searching for more oil and gas when it should be doing more to stop using them altogether. Hannah Thomas-Peter, Sky News.
The Metropolitan Police says the stabbing of two of its officers in London's Leicester Square this morning was not terror-related. The two officers remain in hospital, recovering from what are said to be significant stab wounds. A suspect was arrested on suspicion of grievous bodily harm and assaulting an emergency worker. The Women's Super League kicked off tonight with a match between Arsenal and Brighton. And after the summer of success from the Lionesses, the teams are hoping the game will get a newfound support. Our sports correspondent Rob Harris reports.
A sombre start to a season of such significance. A week's delay, Arsenal and Brighton honouring the Queen, and a Women's Super League is underway. The venues are more modest than planned last weekend, but the big ambitions remain. To harness the afterglow of England's first football trophy since 1966, weeks on from winning the Euros.
It's just a fantastic atmosphere, wasn't it, for everybody? And I think that's now an opportunity for a springboard, really, to kind of engage more fans.
And provide a bigger platform for players who are now benefiting from investment in facilities, as Rhiannon Skinner now enjoys at Tottenham.
Well, if I tell you that I coached from 8 till 10 in the dark under one floodlight and I bought my own kit van to where I'm sitting here now and we've got the surroundings that we've got, you know, the game's changed significantly in 20 years. And I think there's a lot of people that have kind of gone through that process. But, you know, ultimately, the game is at such a high level now that I think everybody's understood and accepted that we really do need to invest in it more, and we've got to keep driving it to the next level. And off the back of the Euros win, it'd be really interesting to see where we actually are in a year's time, you know, because I think the game will be totally different for us again, you know, a year down the line.
Bigger crowds are the aspiration. Attracting more than 10,000 for games needs the main stadiums, prioritised for the men's teams, being opened up for the WSL, like next weekend when Anfield stages the WSL Merseyside derby. It's not only attendances that need to grow, so do salaries. Few players earn close to £100,000 a year, let alone in a week like Premier League stars.
It won't be squandered. I'd love to think so one day, but is it in the near future? I think we're quite some way off that.
Not too far off will be the hope of the Lionesses, players who are now rivals again at their clubs, but part of a united mission to seize the momentum of the Euros and elevate the prominence and prosperity of women's football. Rob Harris, Sky News.
Since the death of the Queen, thousands of people have travelled to points around the country to pay their respects to her. The new King and other senior royals have met the crowds and taken part in services and moments of reflection. The events began when the Queen's coffin was moved from Balmoral Castle at the start of the week. Here's a look back on that momentous week.